Emma tightened the strap of her worn leather handbag and took a deep breath before stepping into the glass building of Weston and Company. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and chandeliers, a stark contrast to the chaos she'd left at home, toys scattered across the living room, bottles in the sink, and her baby boy, Noah, sleeping soundly in the arms of her elderly neighbor who had agreed to babysit for the day. Work was Emma's lifeline. Her paycheck wasn't glamorous, but it kept the rent paid, food on the table, and diapers stocked. Yet every morning, she walked into the office with the same dread pressing on her chest, because here, she wasn't seen as Emma, junior strategist. She was Emma, the single mom, the subject of whispers and ridicule. The first sting usually came before she even settled at her desk. "Morning, Emma," said Jessica from accounts, her voice syrupy sweet. "Rough night, you look tired, or is that just the single mom glow?" Laughter followed from a few nearby desks. Emma forced a polite smile, dropped her bag, and switched on her computer. She had long ago decided silence was her best shield, but that didn't stop her heart from aching each time their mockery found a new target. She wasn't ashamed of Noah. Never. He was her miracle. What hurt was the cruelty, the assumptions, the way they painted her story with their own colors. Some whispered she'd been careless. Others muttered that the father had run off the moment responsibility loomed. A few even joked she didn't know who the father was. Emma never corrected them. She had promised herself she wouldn't. Because the truth was far too complicated. Noah's father wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a coward. He wasn't some stranger. He was very much present, powerful, commanding, and feared by all who worked at Weston and Company. He was Alexander Weston, the CEO. Emma still remembered the night it had all begun. She had been an intern then, naive and hopeful, with a talent for marketing presentations that caught his eye. Alexander was nothing like the arrogant, untouchable figure people painted him to be. He had listened to her ideas, encouraged her, even shared quiet moments when work bled into late evenings. Their connection was real, undeniable. One night, it crossed into something deeper. But Alexander's life was complicated. He had family obligations, a company to run, and a reputation to protect. When Emma discovered she was pregnant, panic struck her. She hadn't told him. She couldn't. What place did a baby have in his meticulously curated world? And what right did she have to burden him? So she stayed silent. She chose to raise Noah alone. Her colleagues, however, saw her silence as weakness. One Tuesday afternoon, as she rushed through her lunch break to finish a client pitch, she overheard two employees chatting by the water cooler. "Poor thing," one said. "Probably thought having a baby would trap a man. Didn't work, though. She's just desperate for attention," the other replied. Single moms always have a sob story. Emma's hands trembled, but she typed faster, blinking back the tears. She couldn't afford to crumble. Not here, not in front of them. Things came to a head on the day of the annual company review. The entire staff gathered in the grand conference hall, a space designed to impress clients and intimidate employees. Today, it felt like a stage where Emma would be placed under a spotlight she desperately didn't want. She had been chosen, surprisingly, to present a marketing campaign proposal. It was her chance to prove herself, to finally be recognized for her talent rather than mocked for her circumstances. As she stood near the podium, clutching her notes, she overheard Jessica again. "Can you believe she's presenting? I bet, she was up all night with that baby. Watch her flop. Single moms can't handle pressure." Snickers spread among the row. Emma's stomach twisted, but she lifted her chin. She had faced worse. She had survived worse. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage, heels clicking against the polished floor. The projector light washed over her, blinding and hot, but she steadied her breath and began. At first, her voice wavered. Her hands trembled slightly as she clicked through the slides. But then, as she immersed herself in the story of her campaign, she forgot the stares. Her voice grew stronger, her passion brighter. For 10 full minutes, she was not the single mom. She was Emma, strategist, creator, fighter. The room was silent when she finished. She allowed herself a small smile of relief, until a voice from the back cut through. "Wow, impressive," the man drawled, his tone mocking. "Considering she's raising a kid alone, maybe she should give us a masterclass on how to keep a father from running away." Laughter erupted, the cruelest yet. Emma's chest tightened, her vision blurred with unshed tears. She wanted to run, to escape the humiliation crashing down on her. But before she could move, another voice cut sharply through the room. Enough. The laughter died instantly. The atmosphere shifted, thick with tension. It was Alexander Weston. The CEO stepped forward from the back of the hall, tall and commanding in his tailored suit. His expression was cold, his eyes sharp as blades. He walked to the front with deliberate steps, silence trailing behind him. "I've sat quietly long enough," he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the hall. "I've watched some of you mock and belittle a colleague who works harder than most of you combined. Do you think it makes you clever to ridicule her? It makes you small." No one dared breathe. Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had prayed this day would never come, yet now, here it was, unfolding before everyone's eyes. Alexander's gaze swept the room before settling on her. His expression softened, just for her, and then hardened again as he addressed the staff. "For those of you so curious about Emma's son, so eager to invent stories about a missing father," he paused, his voice steady, "the father is me." Gasps rippled through the hall. Murmurs followed. Emma's knees threatened to buckle. Alexander continued, his words ringing with authority. Emma chose silence. Not because she was ashamed, not because she was weak, but because she wanted to protect me, and protect our son. She never once asked for help. She never once tried to use her position to gain advantage. She carried everything on her own shoulders while you mocked her. He turned his piercing gaze toward the employees who had laughed the loudest. "From this day forward, let it be clear, anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me." The room fell utterly silent. No one dared move. Emma's throat tightened as tears finally spilled down her cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of shame. They were of relief, of vindication. For so long she had carried the weight alone, endured the whispers, the laughter, the humiliation. Now, in front of the entire company, the truth had shattered every cruel word. For the first time since she had walked into Weston and Company, she felt seen. Not as a burden, not as a joke, but as the strong, resilient woman she had always been. And though the future was uncertain, though questions and consequences would surely follow, one thing was undeniable: Emma was no longer alone. Emma adjusted the strap of her faded handbag and stepped into the polished glass building of Weston and Company. The marble lobby gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but to her, it felt more like a stage where she would soon be cast in the role she despised, the pitiful single mom. Every morning was the same. Before she even reached her cubicle, someone found a way to remind her of her supposed shortcomings. "Morning, Emma," chirped Jessica from accounts, her smile sugar-sweet. "Late night, baby teething again." The words dripped with condescension, and laughter rippled through the office. Emma forced a polite nod and walked briskly to her desk. She'd learned long ago that silence was her best shield. But each time their whispers reached her ears, a quiet ache blossomed in her chest. She wasn't ashamed of Noah. Never. Her son was her miracle, her reason to push forward despite the exhaustion. What hurt wasn't his existence but the cruel way people twisted her story. They imagined scandals, one-night mistakes, or a runaway father. No one ever guessed the truth. The truth was that Noah's father wasn't absent at all. He was Alexander Weston, the CEO of Weston and Company, the very man whose name was on the building. Emma's breath always caught when he walked through the office. Tall, confident, every inch a leader people respected and feared. To the staff, he was untouchable. To Emma, he was much more: the man she had once loved, the man she had chosen to shield from the chaos her pregnancy could have caused. She still remembered the night their paths had crossed beyond the office. She'd been an intern then, burning the midnight oil on a campaign draft. Alexander had stopped by to check on the progress, and their conversation had turned personal. There was no arrogance in him that night, no distance. Just a man who listened, who understood. The connection deepened, and one night, lines blurred. When Emma discovered she was pregnant, she was terrified. She couldn't bring herself to tell him. His life was too complicated, his responsibilities too immense. What right did she have to anchor him with her problems? So she chose silence, vowing to raise Noah alone. But her silence had consequences. At Weston and Company, her colleagues saw her as a curiosity. They whispered by the water cooler. "Poor thing," one voice said. "Bet she thought having a baby would trap a man. Didn't work though. She probably doesn't even know who the father is," another replied, followed by cruel laughter. Emma clenched her fists beneath her desk but said nothing. She couldn't afford to lose her job. Rent, daycare, food, every penny counted. The pressure grew heavier as the company's annual review approached. It was the one day when everyone, from interns to managers, gathered in the conference hall to hear the CEO's address and see presentations from selected employees. To Emma's shock, she was chosen to present a campaign pitch. It was her chance to shine, to prove she was more than the office gossip. But it also placed her squarely in the spotlight of those who relished watching her fail. The night before, she barely slept. Noah cried with a fever, and Emma paced the room, rocking him in her arms, whispering lullabies. At dawn, she dressed in her best, a blouse she had ironed twice to hide its age, and prayed her presentation would speak louder than the rumors. But as she stood backstage, waiting for her turn, she overheard Jessica's voice again. "Can you believe she's actually presenting? I bet she was up all night. Single moms always try too hard. Watch her flop." Laughter echoed. Emma swallowed hard, her pulse racing. She tightened her grip on her notes and whispered to herself, "For Noah. For us." When her name was called, she walked onto the stage, the weight of every mocking laugh pressing on her shoulders. Part 2. The Revelation, approximately 750 words. The spotlight from the projector burned hot against Emma's face as she began her presentation. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, her confidence grew. Slide by slide, she explained her campaign idea, her passion shining through. For a few precious minutes, she felt like herself again, capable, confident, more than the whispers. When she concluded, silence hung in the air. Relief flooded her chest. She had done it. Then, from the back of the hall, a mocking voice cut through. "Wow, impressive, especially for someone raising a kid alone. Maybe you should teach us how not to scare off a father." Cruel laughter erupted. The sting was sharper than ever. Emma's vision blurred with tears. She wanted to vanish, to escape the humiliation that had followed her for months. And then, enough. The word rang out like a thunderclap. The laughter died instantly. Every head turned toward the back of the room. Alexander Weston was standing there, his face set like stone, his eyes dark with anger. The CEO's presence commanded silence. He walked down the aisle, each step deliberate, the air in the room tightening with every movement. "I've listened to enough of this nonsense," Alexander said, his voice calm yet cutting. "I've watched some of you ridicule and belittle a colleague who works harder than most of you combined. Do you think it makes you clever to mock her? It makes you small." No one dared move. Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the room could hear it. Alexander stopped at the front, his gaze sweeping the audience before landing on her. His eyes softened, if only for a moment, before hardening again as he addressed the staff. "You've all been so curious about Emma's son. So eager to gossip about a missing father." His voice dropped, steady and deliberate. "The father is me." Gasps filled the hall. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Emma's knees weakened. She clutched the podium for support, her mind spinning. Alexander continued, his voice unwavering. "Emma never once asked me for help. She never tried to use her position for advantage. She carried the weight of raising our son entirely on her own shoulders, while some of you mocked her behind her back." He turned his gaze to the employees who had laughed the loudest. "From this day forward, anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me." The room fell silent. Shock rippled through every row. No one dared meet his eyes. Emma's throat tightened, tears spilling down her cheeks. But for the first time, they weren't from humiliation. They were from relief, vindication. She had endured so much, the whispers, the cruel jokes, the long nights alone. And now, in front of everyone who had doubted her, the truth had shattered their lies. For the first time since she walked into Weston and Company, she felt seen. Not as a burden, not as a joke, but as Emma, strong, resilient, and worthy. And though questions lingered, though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear, she was no longer alone. Her colleagues sat stunned, whispers of disbelief swirling in the aftermath. But none dared laugh again. Emma lifted her chin, meeting Alexander's gaze. His eyes held hers, steady and certain. For the first time in a long while, she believed, truly believed, that everything was going to be okay.